Hey, welcome back guys, it's Crazy Welder. I figured I'd update all of you on what's been going on recently, and basically I've been working on a bunch of stuff at home. I've also just had pretty much, a very hectic lifestyle back here, and I figured I'd show you what the projects have been that I've been working on. One of them is the Xbox One project. As you can see, I made quite a different, change here. I've changed from this 90, or I believe it's a 80 millimeter Reven fan, up to a 90 millimeter fan, and this one is a Scythe. The Scythe fan is actually looking, a lot better. It's got this custom little skull cover on it. Eventually I'm going to basically get rid of all the hot glue that's around this thing because it looks pretty ugly. It's also kind of interfering with the cooler itself inside, so I'm going to move the fan slightly upwards a little bit, so it means it's not going to be quite as flush as the Reven fan when the Reven fan was working, but it is going to be a lot quieter because the Reven fan, I believe it spins up to about 3,000 RPM. This fan only goes to, I believe, 2,000. So it's a much slower fan, but at the same time, it also moves a little bit more air. So the result is that it's quieter, but it actually has pretty much the same or better cooling efficiency than what I had with the Reven. It's also able to cool more of the inside of the case as well, which is a big plus because there's additional components on there, such as the memory chips that need to be cooled, which the default cooler actually does, in fact, cool down quite a bit. As I had it with the Reven cooler before, that wasn't the case. Something else you will see from my previous designs is that I've actually moved the Wi-Fi antenna inside. Now, this isn't really ideal since this mesh actually blocks some of that from getting out, unfortunately. I'm probably not going to do a workaround for this since I don't want to cut around the mesh. But since my Xbox is mostly hardwired, I really don't care for the antenna getting like an incredible reception. As it is, I think it looks better than with the antenna outside. I'm also going to be doing a paint job for this case as well, since it needs to be repainted. And something else that you don't see right away is that the buttons, I still haven't really figured out a good way to get these guys mounted. I think I'm probably going to change the location of where they are right now because I don't really like the way it looks. It's also kind of hard to press these down. The power button works fine, but the eject and sync buttons don't really work so well. And I might look into getting a dust cover for the CD drive, or the Blu-ray drive I should say, but that might not happen for a little while. And eventually what I do want to do is also get a mesh for the back over here to cover this area up, since it does look quite terrible right now. But so this is one of the projects. It's been coming along a little bit slowly. On the other hand, though, it's still the slimmest Xbox, even considering the Xbox One X, and even with my fan eventually sticking out a little bit more than it was previously, even with that adding additional height, it's still going to be a much slimmer profile than any of the other Xboxes that are available out there on the market right now. And I can't say it's necessarily going to be quieter because it's just, it's not going to be the case. I have considered other cooling solutions. I've actually found a number of vendors that do basically micro blowers, which are essentially a centripetal fan like you see in the PlayStation consoles, which have been there, I believe, since like the PS2 onwards. Those tend to work pretty well, but the problem is I would only be able to put one of them on. And after a while, they do start to make a lot of noise as well, despite moving a ton of air. And the problem is that the only way to really mount it properly would be to either put the microblower either here or here, because the way the fins are oriented on this cooler, the air would have to be going in this direction or downwards. And unfortunately, there's really not that much space in either direction. So if I did go with a microblower, I'd have to go with smaller ones, which ultimately make more noise. So I decided to not go that route. One of the other solutions that I actually came across, there are two other solutions specifically that looked kind of promising, but at the same time the companies never really got back to me, so I'm not sure what the deal is there. One of them is actually an ionic blower, so if you guys are familiar with those fans that are like floor standing fans that have an ion setting, basically you've got two metal plates, and as the electricity flows through them, they essentially end up exciting the electrons that are in the air molecules. What ends up happening then is, as they start to move and collide between the two plates, essentially they end up moving along the air molecules, and so that causes the air to move. It's kind of a shitty explanation, but you can read about them more yourself and kind of see how that works. They're actually really quiet. They work really well, but that company never got back to me. If they did, I would definitely be using it in this console because it would just make life that much simpler. You know, the console wouldn't have to have this giant cutout over here. So that was one of the companies. One of the other ones is basically a piezo electric cooler, and the way that it works is basically you have two metal plates, and when you run a current through them, they act as a bellows. So essentially the back part of it sucks air in, and then as it basically collapses, it pushes the air out, and then as the little capsule expands again, just like the bellows, it sucks air in, and then as it collapses again, the air gets pushed out. And those solutions are incredibly quiet. You know, they're really portable. The issue that I had with them ultimately was that the amount of air that they moved was really insignificant compared to fans like this or even the ionic cooler, because you're looking at a magnitude of about 1 to a maximum of 2 CFM with the bellows style coolers, and I'd need to mount multiples in order to actually cool this thing down. And as much as I'd like to kind of do that, you know, unfortunately there's not really an additional power supply for more of them on the Xbox to be able to use it that way. I could scavenge some of the USB ports, but then that also decreases the functionality of the console, and you know, the cooling efficiency still wouldn't quite be there. The other problem is that, again, with the bellows coolers, I would only really be able to put them either on this side or on the other side, and if they're going to be inhaling air from this side, or intaking I should say, then that would mean that it would be taking the hot air and blowing it past the cooler, which is inside the console, which is not great. If I put them in here, they would be taking in cooler air, but the problem is then there's really nowhere for it to go. It just ends up essentially collecting inside the console again, which is obviously not ideal. So, you know, I've been looking at some other cooling solutions. I don't know how many of them will prove to be promising. For the time being, I'm pretty happy with the way that this system works. You know, I've had the chance to play a couple of hours of the Master Chief Collection with this setup and had absolutely no issues overheating. You know, really didn't notice a ton of system noise. And you know, it's been working pretty good. So eventually, you know, if the Xbox One X does come out and I end up tidying this up a little bit more, this will probably end up going on sale, so I will let you guys know if that does happen. I don't know if that's something that I 100% plan on doing, but obviously if it does end up getting sold, it'll be in much better condition than what you see in, you know, of it right now. I will be selling it as a completed project, so we'll have all of those features, which is, you know, the properly working buttons, the mesh on the side, and a cleaned up fan, as well as a new paint job. So it will be a pretty good looking console. You know, again, it will be the slimmest Xbox console as well, so you can really, you know, take it with you. I've had this thing in backpacks and so on. Very easy to carry around. You know, and again, pretty powerful console still for its, you know, for its size. So all things considered, you'd be getting a pretty good deal on this. I don't know what the pricing on this would be. I would assume that I would probably charge something like $400 for it if I were to sell it. Just based on the amount of R&D that I had to do, the labor, and all that stuff to get this thing up and running. But that would probably be kind of the top. So, you know, all things considered, for that price, it wouldn't be a half bad console. So now I'm going to show you guys the second project that I've been working on, which has been taking up a decent amount of my time, and also, you know, quite a bit of research, so you can kind of see, you know, what I've been up to and see if, you know, it's a project that you would also be interested in as well. Okay folks, so this is the second project, and I apologize for the mess in my room. I've not really had too much time to clean up since I've just had so many kind of different projects going on here and there. Basically what this will be is a mining rig, and I don't know what coins I'm going to be mining yet. It's going to be some kind of cryptocurrency, and most likely an altcoin. Mining Bitcoin at this point is really kind of worthless because there's just so many people with ASICs out there, especially in China. You know, they've got free electricity, so they can mine all day long and not really care about it. You know, here in the States, especially where I'm at, the cost for electricity per kilowatt hour, something like, I think in my area it's like 15 or 14 cents. So it's not exactly cheap. If you live next to a power station or, next to a, water dam, for example, that provides electricity, then you typically get a much lower, cost, which, for people that are living in those areas, it makes a lot more sense to mine. Where I'm at, not so much, but we'll see. What I do like about this setup, basically this will be using, for the time being, at least 10 Odroids. And the Odroids are pretty cool because in this specific configuration, this whole frame basically acts as a heatsink. They have no additional fan. There's no HDMI, no other, stuff taking up space. So it's a very portable unit. They've got a quad-core ARM processor on there. You can use, the full 8 cores of this thing if you choose to do so, because there are 8 total, but the problem is you end up basically really running up the heat at that point. Now, as they are right now, I don't have fans set up for this thing just yet, but I will have little blower fans set up on these guys as well to kind of help keep them a little bit cooler. At some point on, I may consider doing immersion cooling, but I haven't really, gotten that far yet, and I have to kind of see if the ROI makes sense and what the period of time is for the ROI for this thing. I've considered mining anything from Zcash to Monero to things like Vericoin or VRM. It stands to kind of consider a bunch of different coins right now, because ultimately some are going to be easy to mine, some won't. It also, it depends on how well the system is going to perform. These particular Odroid units are pretty cool. They've got a pretty decent amount of power. They also don't draw too much electricity, which is really cool. For this whole stack of 10 right here, I calculated out to be something in the neighborhood of around 260 watts of total power consumption, which really, when you consider it in the bigger scheme of things, it's really not half bad. Basically, any GPU mining rig that people would be using, with like, say, 10 GPUs on there, it would just draw a ridiculous amount of power. Even with a really weak motherboard, really downclocked processor and all of that, you're looking at quite a significant amount of, money for electricity costs. This switch that I have is a TP-Link. It's a 24-port switch because eventually I do want to basically scale this up to 24 units. Right now I've got 10. I'm hoping that the next time I end up ordering them, I will have 14 of them for a total of 24. We'll see if ultimately this project ends up working out. We'll see what kind of coin I'm able to mine. Now, in the place that this system originally is going to sit, it will be free for the electricity side of things, which is kind of cool. I'm not going to tell you guys how that happened, but let's just say that I have a hookup there. So we'll see what the ROI is like there, and I'll update you guys as I go. Now, what you see here is that the patch cables are connected. What you don't see is the power supply. The power supply, I'm still figuring stuff out on that end. I've got one that's sitting around right now, which I believe is a 40 amp, something like 300 watt power supply for this thing, which should be plenty enough to drive, this whole setup. The only thing is that the TP-Link, as you can see, draws its own power. The nice thing about the TP-Link, though, is that it's fanless, so that means there's no additional requirements for power aside from just powering the chipset that's inside of it, which is pretty convenient. And so ultimately, once I do get this up and running, and once it's in a separate enclosure, then I'll have this whole system going, and I'll show you guys kind of what the software is that I'll be using to mine. I still haven't 100% focused in on what I will be using. I do know that I don't want to, sit around and manually look at all these machines and, SSH into them and all that stuff. It just, it doesn't make sense. It's incredibly time consuming. There are a number of different mining OSs designed specifically for these systems out there right now, and a multitude of other systems. Most likely this will have a Linux solution on it of some kind, some sort of Linux OS that is basically designed specifically for mining, and kind of just go from there. I've also considered, essentially using this system to mine something like Gridcoin, which, for those of you not familiar, Gridcoin is basically sort of like folding at home, except you get paid for it. You're just doing calculations for someone else, and they pay you for your, for the crunching power that you've got. And I've also considered potentially just renting this cluster out for distributed computing tasks if, the whole coin mining thing does not work out. As an alternative, if neither of those options end up being viable, then at the very least I will be able to have a home NAS solution for cloud storage, essentially. It'd be like home cloud for hosting all kinds of data that I have. I have tons of files all the time, and being able to have a fairly cheap but yet, powerful NAS solution at home would be awesome. And so that's the other advantage of having this system, is that it's really multi-purpose. Unlike ASICs that you see with things like miners, when the new ASIC comes out, you're basically SOL. You got to dump the one that you have and buy the new one, because otherwise you're just losing out. All of your competition is going to be ahead of you. In this case, since it's a fairly multi-purpose system, I've got a number of things that I can do with it without necessarily having to resort to dishing all of it and trying to sell it at a huge loss, and then trying to recoup that with a new set of miners. So hopefully I'll be able to keep this system around for a while. We'll see, how profitable it is or how it's not profitable. I will let you guys know once I get that going. So let me know in the comments below if you guys are interested in any of these projects. If you're ultimately wanting to see more videos of this sort. If you are, go ahead and like and subscribe. It definitely helps me out. And, if you're not interested, then again, also let me know, because I'd be curious to see where you guys stand and what videos you want to see next. So I'll see you guys in my next video, and until then, good luck, and I'll see y'all later.